Good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us today. In recognition of Safer Internet Day, we wanted to take the time to talk about a topic that often gets overlooked: student loneliness and the impact it has on well-being and safety. We'll begin momentarily. Thank you so much for joining us. For those just joining us, give us a few minutes while we wait for the rest of the group to join. We're so excited to have you guys with us on the webinar today. All right, we'd love to kick off. Thank you again. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on celebrating Safer Internet Day, where we're going to be discussing coming together in an age of isolation. A couple of quick housekeeping items for you. Please feel free to use the Q&A section to ask any questions you have throughout the presentation today. We'll have more time at the end for our Q&A session to answer those questions. As a note, this webinar will be recorded and will be sent to everyone after today's webinar concludes. We encourage you to share this webinar as well with your teammates and your stakeholders. First and foremost, we are Linewize. We're a global leader committed to protecting every student's digital journey at school, home, and everywhere in between. We are proud to support and protect over 25 million children worldwide with our technologies across filtering, student safety threat detection, classroom management, and parent and community engagement. I'm Teresa Reeves, your co-host today. I proudly serve as Territory Director, supporting my partner districts across the Rocky Mountains, Pacific Northwest, and California, and I live in beautiful Colorado. Teodora, your host, is also going to introduce herself.
Perfect. Thank you, Teresa. It's wonderful and exciting to be co-hosting with you today. This is, as you mentioned, such an important topic. Internet safety is what we live and breathe here at Linewize, and we're just really thrilled to be with you here today. And we're so grateful that you've taken out a little bit of your time today to learn a little bit more about this topic, understand children's online behavior, online safety, online well-being a little bit better as well. So just a little bit of background on me. I'm the Director of Wellbeing at Linewize. I have a background in psychology, so I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. I've worked a lot with parents, with families, with children, really trying to kind of address this topic of parenting in the age of technology and children's technology use in this day and age, and really try to, as much as we can, get to the bottom of that question of what healthy technology use looks like, what is positive technology use, and how can we really balance out sort of the positive and the negative, make sure that we keep in as much as the good, as we like to say here at Linewize, and keep out as much of the bad as we possibly can. So a few of the things that we really want to share with you today, we want to sort of start off with a deeper dive into loneliness in a digital world, what that actually looks like, what children's social and emotional lives look like in the present moment, given sort of this tech saturation or even oversaturation that they're experiencing. Talk a little bit about the sort of the evolution of loneliness, of the levels of loneliness that we're seeing right now among the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha generations, and then look at some of the current trends. So what are we observing right now? Where are children spending most of their time online, and what are some of the experiences that they're having in these virtual spaces? And of course, you won't be surprised to know that AI plays a really huge role here, and this emergence of AI companion bots is we think a really key element to this whole conversation around youth loneliness in a digital world. We want to then share some sort of really important pointers, sort of things that will help you recognize some of those signs at your school and at your district. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa, who's going to be telling you a little bit about some of those solutions that you can implement at your district. What are some of the best ways to, first of all, sort of identify that this is a problem, if it is a challenge that your students are experiencing, and then some of the actionable steps that you can take in order to really empower the staff at your district, empower your families, and then, of course, ultimately make sure that your students are having safe and healthy experiences online. And we're going to wrap up today with a little Q&A. We have a few questions that we've received already. As Teresa mentioned, we do have our Q&A function available for you there. So if you do have any questions, please let us know. We do have quite a few members of our marketing team who've sort of joined us in the background today, who are going to be addressing some of those questions. And then towards the end, Teresa and I will address those directly as well. So let's take a look at what sort of the current state of well-being is for youth in the digital world. I think one of the most important sort of insights that we can share when it comes to this, one of the most important things that we need to keep in mind is that today's youth have found themselves in a very interesting, very sort of unique situation where they have this ability to sort of toggle between a couple of different realities, if you will. And probably the sort of the easiest way that we've ever been able to, it's incredibly easy for them to sort of escape the current moment and move into this alternate reality. And we know that at this point, nearly 40%, so just under 40% of teenagers say they're using at least one of the main sort of most popular social media platforms. These are things like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat as well. And some of the recent research has shown that almost half of all teens report being on the internet, being online almost constantly. So what we always like to say is that we need to meet the students where they're at in order to really assess their levels of well-being, levels of safety as well. If they're reporting negative experiences, we need to locate where they're having these experiences first in order to be able to help them with those. So what are some of the insights that we have when it comes to the state of children's sort of social, emotional lives, their well-being? What are they reporting in terms of how they're feeling? And some of those really key elements of loneliness, which are things like a lack of belonging and this sense of not quite fitting in. We know that this is an incredibly important element within the school setting because it has a really strong impact and it correlates with a lot of other really key indicator in terms of how well children are doing in that academic setting. So things like academic achievement can be impacted by this, certainly less social engagement, social interactions. And then of course, this can trickle down all the way to their mental health and their physical health as well. And so this is research over sort of spanning the last 4 or 5 years. We know that loneliness didn't only become an issue over the last year or with the start of the pandemic. About 1 in 3 students were already reporting pre-pandemic that they were experiencing sadness and hopelessness. We know that about half of teens who were interviewed for a poll in 2022 also reported that they're lacking that sense of belonging in their community, at school as well. And then when we sort of look at what the sort of the parents are saying when it comes to this, how they're reflecting on this, about 1 in 5 of them revealed that their children have either little to no friends, and that they're also really struggling with that sort of social aspect of their development. So they're sort of struggling to build relationships with their peers. When we look at the sort of the home setting, the family setting, we're going to be talking to you about community education a little bit later on. We find that to be incredibly important, that parental involvement is incredibly important when it comes to this topic. Some of the research emerging there as well in the home when it comes to parental technology use is also suggesting to us that as parents, we need to be a little bit more sort of self-aware, a little bit more introspective when it comes to how we use our own devices, because that also seems to have a negative impact where we're using them in excess on our children, on how connected they feel to us and to their family, and again, to their community as a whole. The final sort of statistic insight that I wanted to share with you there is probably one that I find to be the most impactful. There have been a few studies in the US looking at sort of the trends of young people meeting up in person. There's some statistics that are looking at this relatively limited period. So between 2003, 2019, the University of Michigan has done some studies looking much further back. So looking at the 1970s as well. And in general, we're seeing a pretty drastic decrease in the amount of time that young people are spending with each other in person without that device as sort of the communication sort of method or the communication channel, if you will. And so what we're seeing between sort of 2003, 2019 is about 2 hours less of time being spent in person, spending time together after school, spending time at home, on the playground, again, depending on children's ages. So we are seeing this pretty sort of serious decline in the amount of time spent without those devices in hand. And so then thinking about kind of how we've come to the point which we're at right now and how this evolution of the loneliness epidemic has happened. You probably recall that back in 2023, the former US Surgeon General released a couple of different reports actually this year. Their office was quite active this year addressing issues like isolation and loneliness, the impact of social media as well. And there was a declaration at that point of this as an epidemic and also a really underappreciated public health crisis. And that's a direct quote from that report. There were also 6 pillars of repair that were suggested in that report, and one of which was really heavily focused on sort of reforming digital environments. So reforming these spaces in which children spent so much of their time. And again, I think this is incredibly difficult because this is the place that children spend most of their time. In some cases, they're spending 9+ hours within these virtual spaces. And so asking those questions around what is actually happening in these spaces is really, I think, going to answer that question of how we can try to reduce loneliness and really improve genuine and high quality, meaningful connection. So the pandemic era obviously brought in social distancing, hybrid learning that started sort of creating that space and that separation between children, in some cases, between children and their peers, between them and their families as well. And this drastic reduction in these opportunities for social interactions, which are so incredibly important for healthy development. And then when we look at some of the lasting effects of that, you probably would have seen a few reports coming out in January of this year towards sort of the end of last year as well, looking at those really, really high rates of absenteeism. We have improved a little bit. So we're at about sort of 32 or 33% at this point, but we're still well above those pre-pandemic levels. And so we're still finding that a lot of children are staying home. They're not attending class as much as they should be. Of course, inevitably, we see a decline there in academic performance. Another report that was released earlier this year looking at some of those science grades, math, language as well, showing a pretty serious decline. And then ultimately, and you know, I'm sure we have a lot of teachers here today as well. You would have seen this, you're on the front lines of this. These significant delays in developmental milestones. We've been hearing that quite a lot from sort of elementary school teachers, middle school teachers as well. So the teachers who have students who are transitioning from an earlier phase into now being at elementary or middle school, saying that there are some sort of fundamental skills. Usually these are social and emotional skills that children don't seem to have reached. They haven't achieved these yet. And so a lot of teachers are sort of having to suspend the teaching that they're doing in order to really work on some of these fundamental skills. So we're still seeing these now as part of that lasting effect of isolation. And I think it's probably likely that we're going to continue seeing these. One of the greatest impacts on all of this at this moment is really this ubiquity of technology, of the use of technology in early childhood. And so again, what we're seeing from our own experiences at Linewize, what we're seeing from polls and reports that are being issued in the US and around the world, is that device ownership is happening at an ever earlier age, typically at around the age of 2. Most kids in the US will own their own tablet. It used to be that by about 12 or 13, they would own their own smartphone. This is happening a lot sooner now. In some instances, we're seeing 8-year-olds who own their own smartphones as well. With this, what also happens and what also comes up inevitably is starting to use and sort of consume social media content at an earlier and earlier age. And so some recent reports from 2024 also showing that nearly 40% of 2 to 5-year-old children are consuming digital content on platforms like TikTok. And the statistics, the numbers are a little bit lower for some of the other platforms, but they're still around 20–30% when it comes to platforms like Snapchat, when it comes to Instagram as well. And we're not going to delve too deeply into age restrictions and recommendations, but you're probably aware of the fact that 13 and above is that recommended age for social media use. So we're really seeing this shift when it comes to Gen Alpha starting to own devices at an earlier age, starting to consume digital content at an earlier age. And then as we sort of move into talking about what the current trends are and what we're seeing now, where the movements are, some of the key movements, it's this emergence of AI technologies. Initially, of course, we're really focusing on ChatGPT, on the role that it might play in academic dishonesty. That was really sort of the focus of our concerns. We've now moved more into looking at similar technologies, so things like AI chatbots, platforms like character.ai that are incredibly popular, and starting to observe this change in youth behavior where they're starting to interact increasingly with these types of chatbots, starting to spend a lot of time with these chatbots, and really starting to form some very significant relationships with them as well. So I'd like to pause here for just a couple of minutes to get a little bit of sort of your insights, your reactions as well, and your input around this question of some of the ways in which we worry about what children are doing online. So we'd love to know what is sort of some of the key problematic behaviors that you're spotting among your student population. You can see we have a few different options there. So things like gaming and social media, the sort of the amount of distraction that comes from interacting with these platforms, cyberbullying, and then you can see that we have a couple of different AI options there as well. So AI in the context of plagiarizing, and then AI chatbots as well. Some of the more recent conversations that I've been having with some of our partner districts here in the US, what we're hearing is that some of the key online safety issues, so things like cyberbullying, inappropriate sort of adult conversations, are actually happening within the realm of those AI chatbot platforms, so things like character.ai. So we have about 50% of our participants, just a little bit over that, responding. I'd love to maybe take another 30 seconds or so, see if we can get to maybe 70%. We're almost at 60 now. So what is sort of the key problematic behavior that you're seeing with your students at the moment? And I'll share these results with you in just a second. And I think you'll find that they pretty much align with sort of the issues that we're seeing nationally there as well. Maybe just give it maybe 5 or 6 seconds, see if we can get that 70% mark. We're almost there. Maybe a couple more seconds. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much for participating in this. It's always really important for us to get that input from you, and we get so much rich data, rich information based on your own personal experiences. So very much as we would expect, you can see that two of the sort of most problematic aspects there of online behavior are gaming and social media. And the role they play in distraction, and then cyberbullying being another big one as well. And again, you can see here that there is that emergence of AI in the context of plagiarism, and then a little bit of those AI chatbots as well. Perfect. All right, so we wanted to see what AI considers to be a connected student, what AI, after having been trained in all of the data that exists out there on the internet, what its own perception is when we say students in a digital world. What is the vision for what that actually looks like, and how does that sort of fare in this conversation around loneliness and connectedness? What does that actually look like in the digital world? And so you can see here, this was the prompt that we put in DALL-E, so students in the digital world, and this was the image that came out as a result of that. And you can see there, one of the key things that we noticed as this image emerged is this connectedness, this one-on-one connectedness with the technology, with the device. You can see some of the students there wearing VR goggles, but this sort of disconnectedness from each other. And so what it means to be a community of students and to be sort of learning together has really drastically changed, even just over the past couple of years, I would say. There's been some sort of interesting information coming out as well, different polls being conducted with Gen Zers, millennials as well, sort of asking them about their perception of human to human versus human to AI relationships. And there was a recent poll that was done with millennials and Gen Zers, and about half of them reported that they believe that we can form perfectly meaningful connections and relationships with artificial intelligence, the same way that we do with other humans. So I think that's very interesting. And I think that's yet another indicator in terms of sort of this new trend and this movement that we're seeing, this increase in connection and communication and interaction and sort of attachment and relationship building with AI chatbots, character bots. This was a really interesting insight that we came to recently through our Linewize filter data. So this is data from back in September of last year. What we found was that students in the US are actually starting to interact with these character-based chatbots a lot more than they are with ChatGPT. This is, again, another really interesting perspective shift in terms of really the focus that we were giving to ChatGPT initially, and how it can play a role in plagiarizing, academic dishonesty, and the fact that this is really now shifting to these relationships that young people are forming with these character bots. There are a few key reasons that I think we need to keep in mind that really explain this trend and why this is starting to happen. To begin with, there's a huge amount of sort of validation, a sense of safety that young people get from interacting with these platforms. They're available 24/7. As humans, we're almost 24/7 available in this connected day and age, but not quite, right? So this is a sort of a resource that's available at all times. And these platforms, and many of you would have used them, they're really designed to be very positive in pretty much every single way, right? They're polite, they're respectful, they're supposed to be helpful. They're certainly supposed to be non-judgmental. They're certainly built to be that way, and incredibly encouraging. And in the field of psychology, of psychotherapy, we talk about something known as unconditional positive regard. And this is very much how these bots have been built as well. And so you can see how that can be incredibly attractive, especially to a child who perhaps doesn't have these types of positive experiences in sort of in real life, IRL, as they'll often say. A much greater amount of control, and that, as I mentioned earlier, escapism, that it's becoming so much easier to do nowadays, again, given this frictionless, really easy availability of these platforms. The world right now is oversaturated with a lot of negative information. We talk about doom scrolling really often. We assume that kids aren't doing that as well, that maybe they don't know as much as we do about the various conflicts and various problems and challenges that are happening in the world. They actually do. And they certainly see the world as being incredibly chaotic and incredibly unpredictable. And this, of course, scares them and leaves them feeling very, very anxious. So now they have this really incredible piece of technology that they can control, and they can have these virtual conversations with these highly customizable characters and sort of personalities that they can build and create to their liking. And these can resemble their favorite cartoon characters, favorite figures from history, or they can build brand new ones that, again, will really suit them in terms of their character, personality, sense of humor, language, vocabulary, and so many other things. And so ultimately, really what we see here is that these character bots are filling in that really significant human void. It's not always the case that children who have sort of serious problems and challenges in real life are flocking to these technologies. We also see kids accessing them because they're fun, because they're interesting, because they're new, because they're different, but sort of their ability to reality check and to tell that this is not an actual human is still not quite there. And we find this with grown-ups as well. The Turing test, where the question is asked of whether we can distinguish between AI and a human. There was a relatively recent study last year that was done around this with adults, and we found that many of them, the majority of them, actually had a really hard time sort of creating that distinction and being able to tell when they're speaking to ChatGPT versus an actual human. And so young people, adults as well, find it very easy to sort of drift off into these romantic relationships, friendships. Receiving therapy and counseling and advice as well is another really sort of popular way of interacting with these different platforms. And so what are some of the ways that you can really look at the behavior of your own students on a district level, on a school level, for teachers on the levels of their classrooms, and be able to recognize some of these early signs of loneliness, of isolation, of your students, perhaps seeking out these types of platforms for comfort and for support for those romantic relationships and others as well. So one of the sort of the easiest way to tell, obviously, is disciplinary issues, whether it's some of those more sort of acting out type behaviors, breaking the rules, but then also, again, going back to absenteeism. It's sort of a vicious cycle when it comes to loneliness, that lack of a sense of belonging as well. It leads to more absences, which then lead to greater loneliness, which can then lead to greater absences, and then can really lead children to spend a lot more of their time in these virtual spaces. The simplest way to tell is really that spike in AI usage. As I mentioned earlier, this is sort of an emerging concern for a lot of districts. So an increase in time spent on some of these AI platforms would be one of the easiest ways to tell. Information that you get from parents, this is where that family engagement is incredibly important. And really speaking to your parents about their students, about any mood changes, again, about social withdrawal, again, absenteeism, some of the clearest signs. Being unengaged, being distracted during class earlier on. We saw many of you reporting sort of gaming, social media use as being a really big problem. So having troubles focusing or following instructions, or really sort of being that active participant, it all falls into sort of that vicious cycle. And then finally, some of the concerning behaviors that you might be finding online. Teresa will be talking about one of the solutions in just a second that really address this problem specifically. So either students who are sort of proactively seeking out harmful, problematic, inappropriate content, or you might also find that children who are the victims of cyberbullying, who are being cyberbullied, they're going to be much more likely to experience those signs and feelings of isolation and loneliness, and again, will fall into sort of that vicious cycle. And again, going back to research, to what we're actually hearing from young people, there's a recent report by Common Sense Media that showed sort of a couple of key reasons why students are utilizing these AI chatbots. There's about 20% of teens who reported that they use them for seeking out advice, right? So that falls into that sort of therapeutic segment of use. And then a little bit less than that reported that they're using them as companions, right? So it's important to keep in mind that your students, many of your students will actively be seeking out these platforms for that purpose. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about how districts can proactively and strategically address this loneliness pandemic and epidemic, rather.
Thanks, Teodora. So first of all, when we talk about that is, we've talked a lot of things in terms of how Linewize can partner to support challenges like the disciplinary issues that Teodora talked about concerning online behavior, parent concerns, the spike that we're hearing about in overall AI usage. Next slide. Thanks. And what we want to do is, we have a commitment here in Linewize. So there's a commitment to combat or address these rises across all of these topics that Teodora has been covering today. And I want to briefly evidence how we are bringing these 3 key platforms into our student safety framework in that commitment to our school districts. First and foremost, I'll be talking about Pulse, which enabling students to self-identify and raise their hand for help. Our Monitor Student Safety Threat Detection identifies those vulnerable students and provides timely intervention. And then last but not least, community. This is where we empower and educate our staff, our parent communities to provide curated digital literacy resources, providing our parents with a parent app to do that supervising, right, and managing on those personal devices at home. So let's start with Pulse. We're in a Web 2.0 app world. I think we all can agree that, right? Where our students are collaborating, they're communicating and feel really, quite frankly, most safe online. And we need to understand where that comfort space is and enable them the ability to reach out and foster that culture of what we call inclusion. With Pulse, this is enabling and encouraging students to self-identify when they need help. We provide a 60-second weekly check-in that simply eliminates barriers to connect. Pulse provides our students an anonymous method so they can share gratitude, maybe give some kudos, and just connect about how they're feeling that day. By providing that anonymous method to share that, we're giving them a list of also trusted advisors to share that feedback with. And as we know, that data is super critical. And with Pulse, you can uncover school-wide well-being trends and actually use that data to evaluate your existing initiatives and track that progress, thus gauging impact of all those current events and district changes that might be impacting that data across your school district. With Linewize Monitor, we're taking it a step further, right? While enabling students to self-identify with Pulse is critical when we think about social, emotional growth and being where they are, we all know that not all of our students are going to ask for help. Instead, they're going to seek ways to connect, to get those answers and look for help on Google searches, chat boards, chatbots, we just talked about it, documenting their feelings in a form maybe, and seek where they feel are safe spaces online to stay anonymous to articulate their intentions and feelings. But Monitor is the most advanced monitoring solution in K-12, where we help our districts detect those online risks before they become actual real-life incidents. I think the numbers speak volumes here. In 2024, we spotted a serious risk every 1.5 minutes. And then every 6 minutes in 2024, we found a child involved in a serious sexual incident. And then every 5 minutes, we're finding a child involved in a serious cyberbullying, bullying, or violent incident. Those numbers are extraordinary and they're too high. Monitor looks at those digital risks below the surface you can't see. We're leveraging AI, natural language processing, and more importantly, 24/7 human moderation. We're partnering together to flag that inappropriate and harmful online behavior in real time. Anywhere that concerning behavior is occurring, such as email drafts, right? Word documents, messaging apps, all around the web. False positives create more harm than good. I think we all can agree with that. Where a district may receive so many alerts in that case that the important at-risk event may just be missed. Our human moderation team significantly reduces those false positives with their review of those events, including context of those alerts to determine the urgency of the event. And you receive those timely alerts to support quick intervention and also document events via annotation and review in your dedicated dashboard. In addition, compliance and merely what's maybe hiding in your Google or Microsoft Drive is important. And that's where Cloud Scan comes in. We allow our districts to discover and address concerning images that are held in their cloud storage. So we do a daily scan where this will uncover and render inaccessible any image that is potentially harmful, illegal, or poses a risk to student safety. Your designated team at your district can be alerted and take action on any of these flagged images. It's time to go beyond the filter. We're identifying that students send threatening messages on Instagram, or we have a student who is building an unsafe connection with an AI chatbot somewhere to seek ways for self-harm. We have that student who is documenting maybe a manifesto or just articulating, verbalizing about hurting others. A partner district shared a story with us recently. They had another monitoring tool that was designed to only look into Google and Microsoft. And while that is a great method, they recognized that's not where their students were living digitally. In the first week of deploying Monitor, this district was notified about a student who was planning a cyberbullying event utilizing ChatGPT, which they used to outline a process on how to team up with other students to cyberbully that individual. So we talked about the data and how data can empower and enable our district's ability to take action now and in the future. And we agree, and data is key. And so what we offer our districts is a free and no cost, complete free student safety audit for Monitor and student well-being analysis for Pulse. This is a simple, minimal uplift effort, and it's an effective process that captures data over a 30-day period to identify where those risks are occurring. And we provide a comprehensive report to you that can be shared with key stakeholders, administration, superintendent, board members, right, to advocate the power of this data. What's even more important and a really big takeaway is these audits can be used also to help support the evidence-based requirements that you guys need for grants that you might be pursuing. So with that, we'd like to take a quick poll with the team. We'd like to understand if you're interested in actually taking a look at a free student safety audit or a student well-being analysis, or could be a little bit of both. And it's stories like this and this data as we're populating where we're uncovering those at-risk events. This could be methods of which this audit may identify where there may be gaps in your filtering solution. And those are critical to help support your initiatives for a safer district environment. We're getting good results so far. Would love to keep this going. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so for people to give time to answer the poll.
Yeah, we've got about a 50% response rate so far, which is great. So maybe we'll give it another, maybe 30 or so seconds.
Thanks, Theodora.
Sure. All right, maybe a couple more seconds.
Great collaboration and participation rate in this one, Theodora.
Absolutely.
Appreciate the entire team here and participants participating in this so actively. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, there we go.
Awesome.
Perfect. All right. Wonderful. All right. So one final aspect of our solutions that we want to tell you about before we wrap up for today, as I mentioned earlier, community involvement, community education is incredibly important. This is sort of the missing piece that we come across really often. Up until, I would say, about a year or two ago, this wasn't really top of mind for a lot of the districts that we were talking to. Obviously, there are always so many competing sort of demands and really things that you're having to address in the immediate present. Community education really wasn't that much of a priority. We've seen that shift in a really drastic and positive way more recently, and we're finding that many more districts understand just how important family engagement, that partnership with the family is, specifically when it comes to online safety, children's digital well-being. That collaboration can make all the difference when it comes to making children safer. And as Teresa mentioned, we're really talking about protecting children online past just the filter, and this community piece plays a really big part in that. Our community offering, I should mention, is a completely free benefit that all of our Linewize customers receive. And it consists of these three components or pillars, if you will. So we have the Custodial Parent app that Teresa had briefly mentioned earlier. We have our online safety hub and our live parent webinars. I want to give you just a little bit of information on each one of these. So the Custodial Parental Control app is a really fantastic way to empower parents, to provide them with some of those insights into their children's online behaviors. again, as I mentioned earlier, many children are spending most of their waking hours within these virtual spaces. And more often than not, their parents really don't have any level of awareness or insight in terms of what their child is doing there. So if we do then run into a sort of worst case scenario where there is a bullying incident, maybe there's a grooming incident, and you're having to communicate with parents about what happened, oftentimes you will hear that it's not my child response. There's no way that my child would ever be involved with something like this. So this is a really fantastic way to sort of make your job easier by providing parents with greater insight, really empowering them to have that control over their child's online experience when it comes to the personal device, and to a certain extent when it comes to their school issue device as well. We supplement that with our online safety hub. So this is a co-branded website that we create for all of our partner districts. This is a website that we're constantly updating, that we're curating and creating content on, where we're covering all of the sort of current hot topics. We have over 300 different apps and platforms that we've done reviews for, created guides and blogs on topics like cyberbullying, influencer culture, the impact of technology use on children's mental health and well-being, guides around grooming, sexting. We have templates for screen time routines, for family tech agreements, and really a whole host of other topics that we cover there, both for your parents and for your staff as well. And then finally, and this I'm very biased towards, and the aspect of our community offering that I'm most excited about, these are the live parent webinars that we offer to all of our partner districts. These are webinars that I host live to these parent communities. And really the goal here is to take a deeper dive into some of these key online safety risks, to again, provide parents with more insight into what these issues are, always stay focused on the actionable steps that they can take, things that they can really implement as soon as they finish watching that webinar. We provide them with a lot of support around how to have conversations with their children. When it comes to online safety, this is still not that common of a topic, inside the home. And so we provide ideas and suggestions and guidelines and advice around all of these. Also provide parents with the opportunity to ask me any questions that they might have. And myself, our team, we're always more than happy to provide additional resources there. And again, I have to say that over the past sort of year or two, we've seen an incredible uptick in interest from our partner districts, booking out a whole academic year worth of webinars on topics like cyberbullying, like how teenagers are using artificial intelligence. What do we mean when we say healthy technology use? What do we mean when we say screen time balance, age-appropriate technology use? Again, sexting, what parents need to know about grooming, a whole collection of different topics that we present on there. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Rissa to give us a little bit of a recap and summary of what we've shared with you so far.
Oh, I'm a big fan of recapping because we're going to get to the fun stuff of the Q&A. We got some good questions coming in. So quick summarization. We talked about 3 areas when we think about this era of isolation and navigating the chatbots and absenteeism and all the things. Some of the things our partner districts can do to support these challenges. And obviously we talked about Pulse today, right? That's that weekly 60-second check-in with those kiddos to self-send those messages and really starting to maximize on that data to allow those school districts to make better decisioning across their priorities and their policies. We also talked about monitor our student safety threat detection, right? Those receiving of alerts of those kiddos at risk before it becomes an event, that human moderation element to reduce those false positives, to get us to those at-risk events and intervene in real time. And then community, what Teodora just talked about, also something I'm equally as passionate about, where we're involving our parent community and our staff to better be educated and equipped to understand the applications, to really educate on topics like what is Snapchat and why is it used, right? And allowing parents to then take control back in the house of those digital devices, right, that are coming into their homes and monitoring that digital activity with their kiddos. So with that, what we'd like to do in accordance to time is open up the Q&A session to the group. And we did already get a couple of questions in, and we'd love to address those. I will say, as we have time, if we run out of time today and we don't have a chance to complete answering those questions, we'd love to follow up with you directly to address those.
Perfect. Yeah, I can see we've had a few questions come up during our session. As you mentioned, we did have a few beforehand as well. So we'll try and get through all of these. I have a couple for you, Teresa, first that you might want to address.
Sure.
One question we had come in is, do I need to have a Linewize filter to use any of these products that we've mentioned today?
Yeah, and the answer is no. These are what we call standalone. Obviously, there's a power to be held when using a Linewize filter. However, no, these can be done standalone on their own.
Perfect. Another question that we had is, do parents have control over the school issued devices when they go home, and what kind of control there as well? So maybe you can speak to that one a little bit, and I can add in a few thoughts.
I was going to say this would be a great tag team one here. I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking. The answer is yes. So not only are we enabling our parents to lock down, manage, see what the kids are doing online on those personal devices at home, but within that same app, schools now have the ability, because we're hearing this from our school districts, is parents are asking, I have my kid's Chromebook that the school issued to them coming home that I have no access to and no control over, and I don't want them on the internet after 10 p.m. at night. We're proud to say that we have enabled that capability for school districts to further expand on that community and parent relationship, to now allow those parents to maybe lock down the filter more on those school-owned devices, maybe lock that computer from accessing the internet, that school-owned device, after 10 p.m. Further commitment between our school districts and our parents to extend the ability of control at home.
So yeah, and I don't think I need to add anything there. I think, Teresa, you said it all. It's just important for districts to understand that whatever rules, whatever filtering rules, obviously they place on those devices are going to stay there. So parents don't have the ability to kind of to take away any of the limitations that the district is placing. Really, the key way in which we're empowering them there is really with what we refer to as that internet pause button. So really to be able to control how much time their child is spending online, again, based off of some of the data that we get from our filtering tool, from Monitor in particular as well. We know that some of the key online safety risks that children experience online actually spike up after school hours. So a lot of these issues don't happen during the school day while in the classroom. They're actually happening when children are at home. And with that, actually, I'll just address one of the questions that we got through our Q&A, which was around whether this webinar and this information is geared more towards admin or educators in general. I would say it's more geared towards the admin, but it still, I think, is relevant for educators as well. I think, different members of staff have a different amount of sort of access to students. They see them from slightly different angles and different sort of perspectives. So I think these topics are really going to be relevant to everybody, because I think what it really comes down to, what we're talking about here, and Teresa, I think you mentioned this earlier in terms of sort of the below the surface. We often use the iceberg as sort of an analogy there. A lot of these issues are happening below the surface, and there isn't only one particular member of staff at the school or district who is going to be able to see this and detect this. It's not just one person's responsibility. Really, everyone plays a role here. These roles are just sort of a little bit different. So I would say that this is really relevant for everybody, but in particular, those school admin.
Yeah, and if I might add on that one really quick, Theodora, I think to expand on that, I think what we're all hearing, all of my districts are hearing, is these questions, this need is coming also from the classroom. It's coming from our teachers who are also parents, right? It's coming from our admins who are getting these questions in board meetings from parents and community members. And so realistically, when you think about the webinar focus, the admin really are tiered to implement a lot of these, but our stakeholders are really everybody in that district and our parent and community members, to be quite frank. And everyone's an advocate to get solutions like this in place to support. It goes around, our well-being framework in support of the student.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had another just now really interesting question come in, and I can address this first, Teresa. I'd be curious to know what your experience is with this as well.
Sure.
But the question is whether other districts are opening up social media on school issue devices, which is very interesting. And I think that this perspective is interesting. Our attendee said, I can see the benefit of possibly seeing cyberbullying events and social media use by doing that. But then how do you justify that added distraction in the classroom? So from my personal experience and the districts that I've spoken to, I think I've only spoken to one so far who do allow social media on school issue devices. It does cause a lot of problems. It does cause a lot of trouble. Again, talking about different members of staff, they see different aspects of this problem in slightly different ways. The teachers end up reporting a lot of, as you would imagine, disengagement, distraction, a lot of drama, right? That's created at the same time. And then through filtering for districts who are maybe using Monitor, they're detecting there a lot of spikes in different different online safety risks. So things like cyberbullying and so on. So the question of how do you justify that in terms of the added distraction is probably a question for each individual district to address. But I would say, again, from my personal experience, I've really only encountered one. Typically, social media, gaming platforms are not allowed on personal or school issue devices. And of course, as you all know, we've had this really serious shift on the district level, but in terms of the states themselves making the decisions to either completely ban or seriously reduce the presence of personal devices within the classroom. Teresa, would you have anything
Yeah, I just have
different to add?
one brief, and that kind of goes to a
Sure.
point I made earlier. That was a great question because it is a surprise when it comes up. When we see that event coming up saying, oh, this came from Instagram, right?
Yeah.
In the districts I serve, some districts open up Instagram for purposes such as like yearbook club or, allowing students to start enabling more social media presence on behalf of a club or event. So there's a limiting factor. But that said, to TDR's point is there's a method of which this is where the balance of how we're filtering and making those decisions at the district level are impacting or impeding on performance in the classroom. And if it's a distraction and a justification, like the question had asked, and it's a great question because it does ask the question, is it justified? So
Yeah.
it's a great question.
Yeah. And one thing I would say to that too, from the perspective of sort of community education, one of the things that we always recommend when we speak to parents around children's social media use, device use as well, age-appropriate technology, is that one thing that we don't necessarily want to do is implement sort of an outright ban. It's up to the family to really make that decision. But one thing we definitely never want to do is just hand over the device or provide them with the ability to create a social media account without doing sort of laying the groundwork first when it comes to the responsible use of that device or of that platform. So in an instance where you perhaps are providing digital safety education, digital citizenship education, awareness around healthy, balanced technology use, and you're providing social media at the same time, I can see it working in those instances where there is that education paired up with it. If we're just enabling the students to utilize these platforms without putting restrictions in place, sort of like what you just mentioned, Teresa, through that example, or we're not providing them with education around what balanced and appropriate use looks like, I think that's when it can become incredibly problematic. So a couple more questions. I want to make sure that we go through them. I will briefly address one that we also got here during our session through the Q&A function. This is a little bit more of a sort of technical engineering question that I think I might have to go back to our team and get some information on for this particular attendee. It has to do with Custodio and sort of how it detects the time spent within an app. And a question there around whether it can actually accurately say how much time a child is spending on an app if that app is just running in the background. So I will have to reach out to, I think, some of our engineers and learn a little bit more about that. To be honest, I'm not aware of sort of that particular challenge. So if an app is just running in the background, how does Custodio actually detect usage with that one? So I will make sure to get a little bit more information about that, educate myself on it as well, and then get that answer back to you. And I think we have a couple more questions that I'll just want to quickly go through. One question we got is to do with sort of Pulse and Monitor and how they work, and sort of what the difference is between anonymous reporting tools and tools like Pulse and Monitor. And so, of course, Pulse being that sort of well-being check-in tool, being a weekly check-in activity, really helps to build that regular habit of sort of raising awareness, raising children's self-awareness of how they're doing in that moment. During that week, with a few sort of follow-up questions to get a little bit more detail on how they're doing at that point. And then, of course, sharing that information with their teachers, with the staff members who you select, so that you can really use that information and sort of build that into any of the existing interventions that you already have, and then possibly introduce additional interventions too. As Teresa mentioned earlier, this data can be incredibly useful if you're thinking about funding, if you're thinking about applying for grants. This is really a sort of an ongoing intervention that you want to use Pulse for. And Monitor is sort of similar in that sense as well. It can give you a lot of really interesting data around what some of the sort of the key online safety risks are at your district. It's something that works on an ongoing basis. And I think one really important thing, and I know, Teresa, this is something you talk about really often, especially in the context of Colorado, where schools spend a lot of time talking about these anonymous reporting tools. It's really supposed to be a partnership. And that's really the idea, that we are bringing all of these different tools together, and we want them all to work together as companions to each other, essentially. Perfect. All right. And one final question that we got there was to do with parent webinars. We had a question around the types of topics that are covered in the parent webinars. I think to a certain extent I addressed this question already, but what I do want to say is that our whole community offering really is, in a true sense, a partnership with our districts. And so what I do there is do a little bit of sort of groundwork with our districts as we're sort of talking about setting up these webinars, inviting your community to them. I'll talk to our partner districts about some of the issues that they are seeing. So sort of like the polling question we asked you earlier around what are some of the biggest problems that you're seeing at your district? Is bullying a really big issue? Are your students spending a lot of time gaming? Are there a lot of conversations around violence? Are there a lot of searches for sort of adult related themes and topics and content? And then based on that, we can also build up the content for our webinars, again, to really make sure that we're addressing the actual issues that are sort of happening on the ground, that we're really speaking to the greatest struggles that parents are experiencing. But some of the general topics that we cover are, again, things like cyberbullying. How, as a parent, can you manage a cyberbullying incident in case your child does actually experience one? Again, what parents need to know about grooming. So where does grooming happen? How does it happen? What is sort of the process that groomers use in order to sort of bring the child in? Again, AI has become a really, really big topic. So a lot of districts late last year and this year as well have been asking for webinars on that topic. So a lot of what we shared with you here as well. How are teens using AI tools? Why are they using them? Where are they spending most of their time? What is actually happening in these virtual spaces? What are the benefits of these AI tools? And then what are some of these more sort of problematic ways in which children can develop these relationships online within these virtual realms? So those are sort of some of the key topics that we cover there. All right, so right on the dot, I think we will wrap up here, although Teresa and I can talk about these topics for a very, very long time. We want to leave it here. For me, I just want to say thank you again to you, Teresa, for being such a wonderful host, for sharing your incredibly valuable experiences with your partner districts you take such good care of. I want to thank all of you for dedicating a whole hour of your day to this presentation, to this topic. Whenever I speak to parents, I always say, I know it's a lot to ask for parents for an hour of their time nowadays. I think it's just as difficult for district school staff to take that time out. So we really appreciate your interest in this topic. We're going to follow up with all of you who have asked us for a little bit more information on the student safety audit, the student well-being analysis as well. And we're just thrilled to have had you here today.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.